The Disappearance, A Tale of Shadows and Secrets. Chapter 1, Missing Friends. In the small, quiet village of Woodhaven, nestled between rolling hills and dense woods, strange things were happening. Over the past month, beloved pets, cats and dogs, had gone missing. The villagers whispered in hushed tones, their voices trembling with worry. Flyers with pictures of fluffy kittens and loyal dogs were pinned to lampposts and bulletin boards, but no one had answers. For 14-year-old Clara, this mystery was personal. Her golden retriever, Max, had disappeared 2 weeks ago. Clara had cried herself to sleep every night since, clutching Max's leash and hoping he would return. But deep down, she knew something sinister was happening in their peaceful village. And Clara had a suspect. Chapter 2, The Strange Old Man. Every neighborhood has its mysteries, and in Woodhaven, it was old Mr. Fletcher. The elderly man lived alone in a crumbling house at the edge of the woods, surrounded by piles of junk and broken furniture. Children whispered stories about him, how he wandered the village late at night, rummaging through trash cans, and muttered to himself. Clara was certain he was behind the disappearances. After all, who else would wander the streets at night? Who else seemed strange enough to do something so awful? She tried to tell her classmates at school. It's him, she insisted to her best friend, MIA. Old Mr. Fletcher. He's the one taking the pets. He's probably hurting them. MIA frowned but said nothing. Clara's other classmates laughed. You've been watching too many horror movies, Clara, one boy teased. But Clara didn't care. She knew. Chapter 3, Following Shadows. Determined to prove her theory, Clara decided to investigate. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village lights flickered on, she waited outside Mr. Fletcher's house. Hidden behind a row of bushes, Clara watched as the old man shuffled out of his front door, dragging a large black trash bag behind him. Her heart pounded. "What's in the bag?" she whispered to herself. She waited until Mr. Fletcher had walked down the street, then followed him at a safe distance. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves under her feet and the faint rustling of the old man's bag. He walked to the edge of the woods and disappeared into the darkness. Clara hesitated. The woods were forbidden after dark, a place of thick shadows and whispers. But her curiosity pushed her forward. As she crept through the trees, she lost sight of Mr. Fletcher. She stumbled over roots and twigs, her flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. After what felt like hours, she found nothing, no sign of him, no suspicious activity. Frustrated, she turned back toward home, her thoughts swirling. He's hiding something. I just know it. Chapter 4, A Friend's Smile. The next day, Clara told MIA about her night in the woods. The two girls sat on the swings in the park, their breath visible in the crisp autumn air. I saw him with a black bag, Clara said, her voice low. He took it into the woods. I couldn't see what he was doing, but it has to be him, MIA. Who else would take all those pets? MIA listened quietly, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she smiled. You've got quite the imagination, Clara. I'm serious. Clara insisted. I need to figure out what he's doing. Maybe we should go back to the woods tonight. MIA shook her head. I don't think that's a good idea. Besides, maybe the pets just ran away. Or maybe someone else took them. You don't have any real proof it's Mr. Fletcher. Clara huffed, crossing her arms. You're not taking this seriously. I am, MIA said, her voice gentle. I just think you need to be careful, that's all. Chapter 5, A Chilling Discovery. That evening, MIA returned home, her mother greeting her warmly as she stepped into their cozy kitchen. How was your day, sweetheart? It was fine, MIA replied with a smile. I'll be in the garden for a bit. MIA opened the fridge and pulled out a package of raw meat wrapped in butcher paper. She placed it on the counter, then retrieved a black plastic bag from under the sink. Carefully, she transferred the meat into the bag, tying it tightly. The house was quiet as MIA slipped out the back door and into the garden. The moonlight cast an eerie glow over the neatly trimmed grass and flower beds. At the far end of the garden, hidden behind a row of tall hedges, was a small patch of disturbed soil. MIA knelt and began digging with a small spade, the cool earth giving way beneath her hands. She placed the black bag into the hole, her movements calm and methodical. Once the bag was buried, she patted the soil down and stood, brushing dirt from her hands. A faint smile played on her lips as she turned back toward the house. Chapter 6: The Web of Lies. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was close to uncovering the truth. She returned to the woods the next night, this time armed with a camera. She hoped to catch Mr. Fletcher in the act and finally prove her theory. But once again, she found nothing. The woods were silent, and Mr. Fletcher's house remained dark. Exhausted and frustrated, Clara decided to confront him directly. She knocked on his door the next morning, her heart racing as she heard footsteps approaching. Mr. Fletcher opened the door, his face weary and confused. "Can I help you?" he asked gruffly. Clara hesitated. Up close, he didn't look like the villain she had imagined. He looked tired. Lonely. I just wanted to ask if you've seen my dog, Max, she said finally. Mr. Fletcher sighed. No, I haven't. I'm sorry about your dog. I've seen the flyers around town. Clara nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. Thank you, she murmured before walking away. Chapter 7: The Final Twist. That evening, Clara stopped by Mia's house to vent her frustrations. She sat at the kitchen table while MIA made them hot chocolate. I don't know what to think anymore, Clara admitted. Maybe I was wrong about Mr. Fletcher. But if it's not him, then who's taking the pets? MIA handed her a steaming mug and shrugged. Maybe it's better not to know. Clara frowned. How can you say that? Don't you care? MIA smiled faintly. Of course I care. I just think some mysteries are better left unsolved. Later that night, as Clara walked home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Meanwhile, MIA stood in her garden, staring at the patch of disturbed soil. The moonlight illuminated her face, her expression calm and unreadable. Some secrets, she whispered to herself, are meant to stay buried. Epilogue: The Unseen Truth. Months passed, and the missing pets were never found. Clara eventually stopped searching, though the mystery lingered in the back of her mind. MIA, however, continued her quiet routine, smiling, listening, and burying her secrets in the shadows of her garden. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters are the ones who wear the brightest smiles. Here is a list of key vocabulary from the story, along with definitions to help readers understand and practice. Nestled, positioned snugly or securely in a particular place. Example: the village was nestled between rolling hills and dense woods. Whispered, spoke in a soft, low voice. Example: villagers whispered in hushed tones about the missing pets. Beloved, deeply loved or cherished. Example: the flyers showed pictures of beloved pets. Eerie, strange and frightening. Example: the streets were eerily quiet as Clara followed Mr. Fletcher. Muttered, spoke in a low or barely audible voice, often in dissatisfaction. Example: Mr. Fletcher muttered to himself as he wandered the village. Suspect: a person thought to be guilty of a crime. Example: Clara had a suspect in mind for the missing pets. Determined: having made a firm decision to do something. Example: Clara was determined to prove her theory. Hesitated, paused before saying or doing something, often due to uncertainty. Example: Clara hesitated before entering the woods. Unnerving: making someone feel nervous or uncomfortable. Example: Mia's smile was faint but unnerving. Methodical: done in a systematic and organized way. Example: MIA buried the bag in the garden with calm, methodical movements. Faint: barely perceptible or noticeable. Example: a faint smile played on Mia's lips. Disturbed: disrupted or altered, often referring to soil or ground. Example, Clara noticed the disturbed soil in Mia's garden. Frustrated, feeling annoyed or distressed due to unfulfilled goals. Example, Clara felt frustrated when she found no evidence in the woods. Gruffly, in a rough or stern manner. Example, Mr. Fletcher spoke gruffly when Clara knocked on his door. Pang, a sudden sharp feeling of emotion, often guilt or sadness. Example, Clara felt a pang of guilt after accusing Mr. Fletcher. Buried, hidden or covered under the ground. Example, Mia carefully buried the bag in the garden. Unsolved, not resolved or explained. Example, Clara couldn't let the mystery of the missing pets remain unsolved. Silhouette, the dark shape or outline of someone or something against a lighter background. Example, Clara thought she saw a silhouette near the woods. Lingered, stayed in a place longer than necessary. Example, the mystery of the missing pets lingered in Clara's mind. Monsters, imaginary creatures or beings that cause fear or harm. Example, sometimes, the scariest monsters are those who wear the brightest smiles.